Hey there, Agile folks, and welcome to the next episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we're building software in an agile manner day in and day out. Folks, this is episode 20. Cora, can you believe it? 20 episodes. Yes, almost half a year. In some ways, it feels like we just started. In other ways, I'm feeling every bit of those 20 episodes. But I've really enjoyed it. I hope you all have enjoyed the ride so far. Today for episode 20, we are going to be talking about blockers or blocked items. What happens when your team has an item that in the flow, it gets blocked for some reason? How do we handle that? How do we visualize it? Just overall, what are some good tips for dealing with those times? So the first thing I want to talk about is what constitutes a blocker or a blocked item. So typically a blocker is when we've got an item in progress, and for whatever reason, we can no longer make forward progress on that item. It doesn't really matter why. A lot of times, items are blocked due to external factors to our team. Maybe we need to get feedback from a customer before we can finish a work item, or we have some outstanding requirements questions, or maybe we have a dependency on another group to do part of the item, but for whatever reason, the item can't move forward anymore. And a lot of times it's external to our team. However, items can be blocked for reasons that are entirely internal to our team as well. In fact, one of the most common sources of blocked items is when a team has an item in progress and doesn't work on it that day. This usually happens when we've got too many things in progress and they're hopping back and forth between multiple cards. And so you have a card that's been started, but then nothing happens that day. If that's true, that's a blocked item. No forward progress was able to be made on that item for that day. And I do highly encourage teams, if you do run into a situation where you have a card in progress and there's no external blocker, but for whatever reason, you don't work on the card that day, to go ahead and mark it as blocked on your board or designate it as blocked so that your team has that visibility, you have that awareness into items that are blocked. And we're going to talk a little bit about why we want to do that and why we want to avoid that situation. But I just want to be clear that an item is really blocked if you aren't making any forward progress on it. So if you have a card that you started and then for whatever reason, we're not working on it that day, it is technically blocked. It isn't moving forward. So now that we know what a blocker is, and we know it's a card that can't be moved forward because of whatever the reason is, then what's the best way to visualize them? And here's where we end up getting into a lot of interesting discussions with people, especially people who use Jira. Because a very common strategy for Jira users is they have these different statuses for tickets that represent some point in the workflow. So there's like a backlog status, maybe a development status, a testing status, perhaps a requirements gathering status. And because these different phases of the workflow are quote unquote statuses, then blocked is just another status. And so it's just the same as any of the other stages in the workflow. And visually, it's often represented as a column. You'll hear people talk about having a blocked column. It's a very common thing to happen in Jira just because of the way Jira works under the hood. Even outside of Jira, though, I do run into teams that will set up a blocked column or some kind of special blocked area on their board to move cards into. I recommend not doing either of those things, not having a special column or special area for block. Not something that is the same as your other workflow statuses. And here's why. When you block an item, you don't want to lose the context that it was blocked under. So if an item is blocked in requirements gathering, I want my team to be aware that's where it's blocked. That's where it's held up, is in requirements gathering. Or if it's blocked in development or wherever it's blocked, I want to keep that context. That's very useful because how I end up resolving that blocker, and in some cases, even the urgency or priority behind that blocker, has a lot to do with where the item is in my actual workflow. So if I quote unquote pull it out of the workflow, then I lose that context. So let's say I'm in Jira. Well, first of all, I would want a crucifix and holy water because I'm in Jira. But let's say I'm in Jira and I'm looking at my list of tickets and the states that they're in, if a ticket is in the blocked status, I don't have any point of reference for where it was when it was blocked. It's just another state that the item could be in, just like being in requirements or being in development. I no longer have that context. So we don't want to make it its own column, because not only do we lose that context, but we also lose it for the metrics. So when we're looking at, say, a cumulative flow diagram, having a blocked column just really messes with that, because if an item could be blocked 2 or 3 times in its whole life cycle. And so it might go from requirements to blocked, back to requirements, to development, to blocked, to testing, to blocked, back to testing, to blocked, back to testing, into production. And if that's what the flow looks like, then we don't really have a good idea of how long that card actually spent in those states. We might be able to figure out how long a card was blocked from that information, but we don't really know in our metrics how long the card was in development or how long it was in requirements, because it keeps jumping out of the work state into blocked. So we don't want to represent blocked that way. We don't want a blocked column. And if you're using Jira statuses for your columns, we don't want blocked to be one of those either. So what is the best way then to visualize them or designate them? Well, something that I like to do is, if I'm using an electronic Kanban board, is there a tag that I can make things blocked? Because if that's true, then I can still run reports and things like that looking for blocked items, but it doesn't have any impact on what state my workflow item is in. It's just an additional descriptor. And it's even handier if I can do something visual with this descriptor, like turn the card red or do something, put an icon on it, do something to really make it stand out. A tool we like to use here at Integrity is Kanbanize, and Kanbanize puts this big blocked icon on the card, so you can look at a board and you can see right away what the blocked items are. But if you're using Jira, using a tag for blocked works pretty well. Most of your electronic systems will let you use tags. Whether it does or it doesn't, though, you do want the blocked items to be visible in some way if you can swing it. Turn it bright red, put a border around it, put a special icon on it, something to let people know, hey, this thing is blocked, so that when your team is looking at the board, these things are front and center. One of my friends does something that I think is really cool, and I've started to do it on a few different boards as well, and that is they create a swim lane at the top of their board for blocked items. So items normally move across the board as they move across the board, and if something gets blocked, it stays in the same column, but it moves up to the upper swim lane. And you could make it a lower swim lane too if you wanted to. But by putting it up in its own swim lane at the top of the board, it really makes those items stand out. And those items are very close to the column header that they were blocked in. So visually, you still have all the context. The card still really stands out, and you don't have to go through the extra trouble of making it bright red or putting a special icon on it or things like that. So that's something you might try as well, is just giving blocked items their own swim lane. I hope that items aren't blocked so often that you have a swim lane for blocked items and it always has stuff in it. But if you find cards are being blocked with some degree of regularity, a swim lane might work for you. So we talked about what a blocker is. We've talked about different ways to visualize them or not visualize them. So how do we deal with them? Once we've got a blocked item and we've marked it on the board in some way, what should our policy be for blockers? Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you is that you should have one, that you should have a policy for dealing with blocked items. I think this is a good thing for teams to talk about even from the get-go. If we have an item that's blocked, what's our policy going to be? Now, I don't think your policy has to be a particular option. I think you can choose whatever option works best for you, but I think you need to have a policy, because if you don't, then every single time an item is blocked, you're probably going to have a discussion or a debate on how to handle it. So having a policy is a good one. I would recommend, as part of your policy, that blocked items do count against any WIP limitations that you have. It's very common for a team to not do that. An item is blocked, so they pull a new item. They just pretend like that blocked item doesn't exist. I don't think that is a good idea in most cases, and here's why. Eventually, that item is going to become unblocked, and when it is, it's going to go right back into your normal flow. Ideally, your WIP limits have been set to ensure your best flow. So if all of a sudden an extra item finds itself in there, all of a sudden you're going to find yourself over WIP limit. And now what are you going to do? Are you going to pull people off of the thing that's currently in progress to work on the thing that just came unblocked? If so, then you're probably going to have a new blocked ticket. It's going to be the one you just pulled, right? So we just had something come free in the system, and we don't have the capacity now to deal with everything that's in progress. So I recommend that if you've got an item that's blocked, you still consider it in progress for all practical purposes. And if that means you have a little bit of slack in your system because an item is blocked, that's fine. That's great, actually, because whoever has that slack now has the capacity to resolve that blocked item when it becomes unblocked. So, if there's really nothing they can do to help with the blocker, then they can help somebody else with a card that's in progress. But what you don't want to do is pull a new item in because something is blocked, especially teams that are new to the whole limiting their WIP thing. It's a very common temptation for them to set a WIP limit that's double their team size. And that way everybody can be working on something. And then you've got some buffer in case something gets blocked. They can instantly pull a new item. And that is the fast track to failure. That is a fast track to having exceeded WIP limits and having all kinds of blocked items all the time. You're basically institutionalizing blocked items when you go that route. So do count them against your WIP limits. So if blocked items are items that are in progress, and they are, what should our policy be? I can't tell you in your context what your policy should be. I can tell you that in most of my teams, we make blockers priority number one almost all the time. When we are doing our daily stand-up and we're looking at the work that needs to be done for that day, if something is blocked on the board, question number one is, can anybody do anything to resolve this blocker or help move it forward? Are we waiting on an answer for somebody? Could we bother them, right? Have we emailed them? Have we called them? Have we sat outside their office until they can't ignore us anymore or they call the police? Is there anything that we could be doing to make progress on this blocker? And only if the answer is no, do we leave the blocker for that day. So I recommend prioritizing blockers. Whatever your policy is, you want to get them out the door, because as long as that item is blocked, it's counting against your WIP limits and it's aging. The clock is ticking on the delivery of that item. We really want to get items through the system as quickly as possible. We don't want these log jams in there. So clearing that log jam, getting that thing out the door, and getting back into our normal flow is a high priority. Now, I will tell you that if this is something that you're having to deal with a lot, if you are having blocked items happen on a regular basis, I highly encourage you to spend time examining the cause for that. Why do your items get blocked so frequently? Is it because people end up not being able to work on cards? If so, it may be that you've got too much work in progress. Is it because you have a lot of dependencies on some third party, either for feedback or to complete a portion of the card? If so, you might want to restructure your team or restructure your workflow around that variability, either eliminating those dependencies or creating policies around those dependencies so that the delays become more predictable. There's lots of things we can do. If you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. Just hop on the Integrity Inspired website and get in touch with us, or follow me on LinkedIn, Phil Ledgerwood, and ask, because I deal with this a lot and I've helped a lot of teams figure out how to deal with volatile policies where blocked items depend on third parties. Maybe that's a great idea for podcast episode 21. We'll find out. But I highly recommend that whatever you do, you do not let blocked items sit there. And that is a temptation a lot of teams have. If an item is blocked, people just don't talk about it. It's as if it doesn't exist. Life goes on, right? And you just forget about the blocker because it's blocked. I highly encourage you to, whatever your policy is, turn that on its head. Make sure blockers are something you're always talking about. You never let a day go by where your team doesn't talk about, what are we doing about this blocker? What forward progress could we possibly be making? Is there anything we could be doing to resolve it? Well, I hope these tips have helped. Blockers are something that almost all of us have to deal with at some point or another. But just keep in mind that blockers can be blocked for a lot of different reasons. It's anything that keeps the card from moving forward for that day. We want to make sure that the blockers are nice and visible, but at the same time, we're not losing the context that they were blocked in. And we want to make sure that we are making blockers a priority. We're treating it just like any other item that happens to be in progress, and we want to make sure that it moves through our system as quickly as possible. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.